If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it would be greatly appreciated if you could give the podcast a 5-star rating. This helps other listeners just like you discover the show. Thank you. This is Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. I'm your host, Andrew Pludger, and I'm a survivor of Bob Jones University. BJU is a fundamentalist college with its roots in white supremacy and is known for its culture of indoctrination, conformity, and control. Its influence extends beyond its campus, impacting Christian schooling, politics, biblical counseling, and evangelical Christianity. The school serves as a hub for churches, schools, and camps, and these institutions perpetrate its abusive teachings and practices. This show explores these areas of influence and amplifies the stories of those who have been impacted by Bob Jones University. This is Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. Hello, everyone. This is Andrew Pludger, and I am really excited for you to hear this episode today because I really was extra careful with this episode and really just connected with this survivor who has decided to remain anonymous, and the name we're going by for them is Daisy. And this is just such a powerful story. And Daisy, unfortunately, is currently, as I'm recording this intro, she is a stay-at-home daughter. She is currently under the control of her parents, at least at the time I'm recording this in May of 2024. And in the beginning, she just shares a little bit about how she grew up in the IFB cults and her father being an IFB pastor. And also she just talks about the pressure of being in this perfect image, of feeling like she was just a trophy to make her parents look good. And eventually her being sent to Bob Jones University and the traumas that she experiences at the school. She really details how she was told at Bob Jones she had a learning disability, but that was never explored, and she wasn't given the help that she needed. Later, after doing some research, she came to the conclusion that she's autistic, and this means that Daisy is self-diagnosed. She has not been diagnosed by a mental health professional at this time yet. In this episode, she details her story and getting through her experiences and the steps that she is taking now to heal and really starting to claim her voice and her autonomy. I am so glad that she came forward and had the courage to share her story. I think it's such an important step in her healing journey. And I think her story is going to help so many people. And I really think that it's really going to touch your heart. But enjoy this interview with Daisy. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to have Daisy on the podcast today, and they're choosing to be anonymous, and Daisy is the fake name we're deciding to use, so no one freak out that I'm using the name Daisy, because that's not her real name. But we've had conversations, we've talked on Zoom before, we've chatted back and forth, and I'm just so excited Daisy, for people to hear your story because I think it's so important, and I don't think it's a perspective I've heard yet from a survivor from Bob Jones University. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm a little nervous, but
Yeah, thank you so much for your bravery. And it's not easy to share these traumas, these hard things that you've been through. But what is so incredible about these spaces is that when you share that in a safe space that is validating and where you're seen, heard, and understood, it can really be so healing and so validating through that. And I hope you'll be able to feel that. And I know there'll be the triggers and the different difficulties. Whew, but it is quite healing to be able to tell it in that space. But for people who do not know you, could you do a quick introduction, just a bit about yourself, how you ended up at BJU, and the years you attended the college?
so I'm the adopted daughter of a fundamentalist minister who subsequently has his own small cult. I left the IFB at 33 in 2021, but during the years that I was in college, I was forced to attend Bob Jones University from the years of 2008 to 2010. And at the time that I was attending there, it had been a really difficult time for me to go because a very close friend of mine had been killed in an accident. And I was not able to feel the feelings that come with that type of loss before I was just shipped off to Bob Jones.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And the next question I have was really, what is your first awareness of BJU and really its impact on you even before you attended the university? And I know you had mentioned having contact with BJU press materials growing up. So did you go to a Christian school or were you homeschooled?
I was homeschooled. And similarly to you, I also studied on the Abeka curriculum for a good couple of years before I started the Bob Jones curriculum. So I was homeschooled from BJU's curriculum from about sixth grade until 12th grade. And I had been aware of Bob Jones University prior from about the age of 4, because one of the things that was constantly taught to me as I was growing up was you go to college at Bob Jones University, and that's where you meet your husband and get married. And from as early as the age of 4, that was what I was aware of it as. It was the place that you went to find a husband, which was the highest thing that a female could achieve in fundamentalism. So after all of the years of homeschool and all of the buildup over time, we were told this is where you're supposed to go, this is where you're going to go. And then I got there. It was never a thing where you were given an opportunity to look at other colleges. It was that's where you're going to go because everyone else in the church had gone there. The entire church was made up of Bob Jones University graduates. And it was like, this is the option. There's no other one.
So yeah, you're not given any choice at all. Yeah. Okay. All right. So from a young age, like what did you think about Bob Jones? Was it this enigma that you were like, this holy place that, oh my gosh, or were you hesitant or questioning about it?
At the time, from a really early age, I was very excited about it because it was taught very heavily. That was like the be all end all for everything. Like you became an adult while you were at Bob Jones because that was where you got married, where you were to meet your husband and all that kind of stuff. And that was the equivalent of growing up and moving out and being an adult and reaching the highest of the high that you could potentially be as a woman. That was very much a mindset that is still enforced to this day. I'm still considered a child now because I'm still single and I'm still living at home. And they very much have that mindset, that hierarchy of if you're a stay at home daughter, then your father is who you answer to and you're still considered a child. And It's a detrimental mindset, but as a kid, that was exciting, and so when I got to the point that I was ready to go before my friend died, I was very excited about it. But it was after her death that I started to feel very trepidatious.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that and then be shoved along to this place that would traumatize you even more. But before we move on, I just want to leave the space if there's anything you want to talk about in your childhood or about Bob Jones' curriculum or anything else.
About my childhood, there was a lot of abuse, a lot of physical abuse when I was younger. Up until my teen years when I grew a little bit taller and much wider than my mother, that was the time that the abuse finally stopped for the most part. There were still some abusive things that occurred physically when I was in college. Around I want to say the end of my freshman year, I was home for Christmas break and I was unpacking my suitcase from school and my mom was helping me. And I don't remember what we were talking about, but something was said that infuriated her and she pinned me into my closet and attempted to strangle me with a wire hanger. And I screamed and I said, "What's wrong with you?" And she seemed to break out of some sort of crazed trance that she was in. And after that, the physical violence against me ended permanently. And it was just emotional, spiritual, and verbal abuse from that point on. When it came time for me to go to Bob Jones, I was excited because I thought that it was a chance for me to finally break free and to get away from that. I felt that Bob Jones was going to be this wonderful place because I had been going to Bob Jones as a camper for many years. I think I had been to the camp maybe about 4 times over the years. And it used to be mostly music camp, and then when I was 15, I went to drama camp, and I was like, "Yes, this is what I wanna do." And I did study drama while I was there. But when you're a camper, you can basically live however you want, and they don't try to enforce rules with you because they know you're not a student and you don't live on campus and you're going to be going home to your family in a week and they want you to love the place and want to come back. And so they don't treat you badly. Although looking back, I do have some memories that were a little concerning for my last year that I was a camper, but it never occurred to me at that time because we were not taught what a red flag was and what to look out for in order to protect ourselves. That didn't exist. It was always just, you are to be controlled. At no point are you to question that. So when it came time for me to go to college, I was completely unaware of what I was about to walk into, and it was a really shocking experience.
So yeah, let's talk about that. So let's just say like it's freshman move-in day. What are your expectations? And even in those first few weeks, what was the reality that you then your eyes were open to?
In the first couple of weeks, there wasn't really that much that I remember because it was all moving in, figuring out what your class schedules were, going through the handbook, which I had read previously. I was already familiar with the majority of the rules that were at least printed on the handbook. I was not familiar with the unspoken rules that were enforced otherwise within the culture, but we'll get into that later. Primarily, the first couple of weeks, I was just excited about meeting my new roommates and getting to know them and figuring out what my classes were. And then around, I want to say the first month in was when it started hitting me like, whoa, this is nothing like I imagined it was going to be. What is this? How do I get out of this? So by the end of my freshman first semester, I came home and I was like, I don't like it there. I don't want to go back.
And I'm curious, what were the specific experiences that made you get to that conclusion or that desire?
It was a conglomeration of several things. Primarily, I started noticing that immediately I didn't fit in and I was not aware of why immediately I didn't fit in. One of the things that had really shocked me was the fact that we weren't allowed to listen to music or watch movies in our dormitory, which for me, growing up as a child, there was always the TV on, always music playing, always some form of distraction, which we weren't allowed. There were some CDs that they would let us have, but the majority of the time, it was stuff that just didn't hit right when you needed it for certain things. And so I always felt very empty because I didn't have that distraction. And the culture itself was very confusing. I came from a strict home, but Bob Jones was about 82 times stricter than what I had come from, particularly in the realm of film and music and entertainment choices. And obviously, the dress culture was different. Growing up, I was not forbidden to wear pants. It was only in church that we had to wear dresses all the time. I grew up wearing jeans and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, I had to be in a dress 100% of the time, unless it was bedtime in the dorm rooms. And that was really confusing for me. And the culture was just very tight. I always felt like I was in like that trash compactor scene in Star Wars where the walls were closing in. That was what I felt like 100% of the time. And like I was being crushed on all sides.
And are there any specific stories you want to share from your first year that stood out to you and your experiences?
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me my first year was that Bob Jones University does not like fat women. I was always very overweight. It's just in my genetics. I've always been a bigger person. And because of that, I was wearing clothes that checked. I had t-shirts on that did the four-finger rule. I had the long skirts and whatnot. But if I bent over, because I was a large woman, my cleavage would go up my neck. And if I sat down, my skirt, if it was a floor-length skirt, would suddenly go up over my knees because my thighs were so large. And I was constantly getting clothing infractions, despite the fact that I was still wearing clothes that checked, because when I sat down, they didn't check anymore. And my first year and my second year, both times, I was socialed because of clothing infractions. Being socialed is when you get 75 demerits, you are banned from communicating with the opposite sex, having any form of contact with them whatsoever. You can't sit next to them during meals. You can't communicate with them in a casual sense. You are banned from having any contact with them whatsoever. And the only time that is not reinforced was in chapel because you had your assigned seating. And if you were next to someone that was of the opposite sex, you had no choice but to sit next to them, but you still weren't allowed to talk to them.
I see. And then how did that impact you?
It definitely made me aware of the fact that I didn't fit in, which was something that I was already painfully aware of because of the fact that I am a chronically ill person and I was sick a lot of the time when I was at Bob Jones. My first year wasn't as bad health wise, but my second year was abysmal. I was so sick. I was even hospitalized at one point because I came down with swine flu.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and so I was in Barge for 2 weeks, and they just had absolutely no empathy for me as a chronically ill person. And the fact that my demerits were going up and up because I kept missing room jobs because I overslept and I had to jump out of bed and throw a dress on and get to class before I was marked absent. They didn't care about that. It was all just, you didn't do your room job, so obviously you're lazy or you have 75 demerits already. So obviously you don't care about the dress code or you don't care about the rules and your grades are bad. So you must be a bad kid. You must not be saved because you can't keep up with us academically.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And I know something that I mentioned in the Surviving BJU podcast, and even in this one, is I say this phrase a lot: difference equals danger. But someone in the Beyond BJU podcast discussion group, which if people listening, the link is in the description if you want to join the discussion group. But someone said difference equals devil. And I was like, ooh, I'm like, that I like that better because I think it's more accurate. Difference equals demonic, difference equals devil of Satan. And so that's what I've learned as I've gotten out of fundamentalism is yeah, difference is of the devil. They see it that way. And I don't know if that's something you want to dig into some.
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely a mindset that was reinforced with me, particularly around my education and my ability to keep up academically. Towards the end of my freshman year, I was put into the SAS building, which was the building that they had for students that were academically slower. And it was around that time that it had been discovered that I had a learning disability. But they never allowed me to be tested to find out what that learning disability was. And recently I discovered that it was autism. But at that time, we were not aware of that. And my academics had always been just average. Even my grades in high school were barely passing. And to this day, I believe that my mother probably tweaked my grades a little bit so that I would be able to graduate because I don't know how I managed to graduate from high school because I was held back a year and all of these things led up to my college experience. And then my freshman year, first semester, my grades were just absolutely horrendous. I was failing everything and I felt like I couldn't keep up. And so I told my mom and dad about it and I was like, I don't know what's wrong. I am studying my backside off. I'm doing everything that I can and I still am getting everything wrong. I don't know what's going on. And they talked to a couple of people, and I ended up in the SAS building, where of course I flourished because it was all high school level stuff. So it was things that I had already done and I was already fairly familiar with. And they had changed my major from drama to home economics. So I was studying home economics and childcare. And so I was studying things that were a little bit more common sense, and I was able to do things a little bit better. So by the end of my freshman year, coming back into sophomore year, first semester, it was announced from Stephen Jones in chapel on the very first day back that the SAS building had a stigma attached to it and that the kids in the SAS building were being bullied by the regular students. So, in order to deal with the stigma that the SAS building had around its students, they had decided that they were going to close the SAS building down and reintegrate the students from the SAS building back in with the regular students so that they wouldn't be bullied anymore. However, they had no intentions of accommodating these students who had been put in the SAS building because they had learning disabilities. So basically, the message that we all got from that was we really don't care about you. You're just going to have to go back and flounder like you were before. And if you fail, too bad. We can do without you anyway. And it was very invalidating and very scary for us because there were so many other students who were in the SAS building that were doing well enough that their grades were passing for such a long time. And then after one semester, we're told we're getting rid of it now and we're not going to help you. And we all just walked around going, what are we going to do now? how can we potentially keep our grades up now that this is gone? And it was a very telling experience. It made it very loud and clear that kids with learning disabilities, and particularly kids with autism, didn't matter on Bob Jones campus.
I'm so sorry. What was your experience in each classroom once you were integrated with everyone else? What was that like? How did the teachers treat you?
My teachers were all very hateful towards me. I had maybe two teachers in the entirety of the time that I was there. Actually, no, maybe three, because the teacher that I had for home economics in the SAS building was very kind to me. But since I only had her for one semester, it almost feels like it didn't count because it was such a short interaction. But of all of the teachers that were assigned to me, the only ones that treated me like a human being were Carrie McGonigal, who taught Bible, and Janie McCauley, who was my theater teacher. And everyone else, it was like I was either completely invisible or I was the bane of their existence. I had another teacher. I can't remember which class it was for, but I know that it was toward the end of my sophomore year that I was taking class with her. And I think it was a biblical studies centered class. But this woman just absolutely had it out for me for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And I remember one time I had to present an essay to her, and I had been struggling with it. And it was a particularly warm day that day. And one of the things that I had taken up to do to prevent myself from getting demerits for clothing infractions, I had this big wool sweater that I would zip all the way up the neck. And that was the only way that I could keep from getting infractions for cleavage, because it didn't matter what I wore. I was always getting in trouble. And this particular day, I had a V-neck shirt on that was still 4 fingers. So I was still covered when I was standing, but it was the same thing in the classroom. When I'm leaning over to write, my cleavage got pushed all the way up my neck. And it was like 95 degrees on campus that day. And this particular classroom that we were in didn't have air conditioning. I had taken off my wool sweatshirt because I was sweating to death. And I was leaning over to write the essay. And I had a question, and I went up front to ask her the question. And she was reading through the essay with me. And she was going, "So you need to correct this." Okay, yes. "This section here is plagiarized, so you need to work on not plagiarizing." Okay, fine. "And do you realize that I need to give you 50 demerits for a clothing infraction right now?" "Yeah." "Excuse me?" And I said, "Why?" And she proceeded to explain that the V-neck shirt that I was wearing was against the clothing code, and because she could see straight down my bra, those were her exact words, "I can see right down your bra," that apparently I was begging for attention and that I deserved 50 demerits for that. And that was my second time being socialed on campus. I truly feel that those times that I was targeted for the clothing infractions, that was actually sexual harassment. And it happened so many times while I was there. I can't even count the amount of times that I was turned in for dress infraction when I was still wearing checkable clothing. Because if I bent over the wrong way or whatnot, because my body was just larger, I was constantly subjected to that harassment. And it was endless. And it carried on the entire time that I was there. The end of my sophomore year was when things were really getting horrendously bad. I had taken as a way of coping with everything to talking to myself in my dorm room when nobody else was around. And towards the last 2 or 3 months that I was there as a student, before they basically told me, "Yeah, your grades are terrible. You may as well just flunk out because we don't really want you here anyway." So that's what I ended up doing. A little bit before that happened, about 3 months before that happened, was talking to myself in my dorm room one day, just trying to process all of the stuff that had happened that day. It had been a really bad day. And not 5 minutes after I finished muttering this stuff under my breath, my phone rings and it was my mom. And she was screaming at me, saying that the dorm supervisor had informed her that I had said this, that, and the other thing. And this, that, and the other thing that she told me that the dorm supervisor claimed to have told her about was something that I had said to myself not 5 minutes before. And I realized a short while later, because one of the things that we were allowed to watch on campus was the news. And there had been a news broadcast a couple of days later showing what it looked like when a person's phone was bugged. And my phone had been reacting exactly the same way. And it finally occurred to me. My parents had bugged my phone and were using it as a way to work in tandem with the school to keep me getting in trouble at all times. And I don't know what their motives were for that, if they had wanted to break me or what, but it was terrifying because a couple of weeks prior to that, I had noticed that my mom was getting all this information, and I thought that people were snitching on me because I had told some people that I was having a difficult time. Of course, I didn't tell them everything, but I mentioned that I was frustrated to a couple of people that I trusted. And not long after, I would get a phone call from my mom. And of course, I always had my phone on me. That was how she was hearing it, and my parents were hearing it. But I went through a period of time where I wasn't talking to anyone unless I absolutely had to, because I was so afraid that everyone was telling my parents all of my actions. I very definitely felt like I was a prisoner on watch because nothing that I said was a secret, and it was terrifying.
Just the trauma of having no privacy, of just having to restrict what you say to anyone and even to yourself at that time. It's just paralyzing. And oh my gosh, just I'm so sorry your parents did that to you. And when you told me your story before we did this, I'm like, in my mind, what I thought was, oh my gosh, they wanted to give you, this is in my opinion, the illusion of, oh, you're choosing to do this. We're going to break you and we're going to do it through Bob Jones University, and you'll come back to us and have that childlike dependency. Because after you told me your story, I was like, oh my gosh, like your family is a cult, 100%. And your father's church is a cult, 100%. And they want full control over every aspect of your life. And you were spot on with that childlike dependency. And that's what all cults do. The cult leader is really like the all-knowing parent or father figure that has all the answers, and you cannot make those decisions on your own. And the only way you can is through what they want because they have all the answers. They have the right way. And if you don't do it their way, you're on a wrong and destructive path. And it's just, oh, I'm just, it's so tragic. And I'm just so sorry for your situation. And yeah, just thank you for your bravery because I know you're still in that situation. And I know thankfully you're not going anymore to that IFB church, but I know you're still trapped with your parents.
And it's interesting that you use the word path of destruction, because this past summer, I actually had a conversation with my father where I had explained that I wanted to have a certain career path. And it was always one that I was told that I could not take or be on because it gave off a quote unquote appearance of evil. It didn't matter that it was my dream and had been my dream for 8 years, and that I was actually able to study that for such a long time. And I had wanted to do this since I was 8 years old. And my dad had the gall to tell me that I was absolutely not going to pursue that career path, and that They were very disappointed with me because for the last 20 years, I had been, quote unquote, on a path of destruction. And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, "You have a lot of gall to tell me that because all I have done for the last 30 plus years of my life was do exactly what you told me to do. So if I'm on a path of destruction, it's of your making. You cannot blame me for that. And since you're disappointed with me anyway, I'm not going to bother trying to please you anymore. I'm going to do what I want to do. I am over 30 years old. I deserve to have autonomy. I deserve to have a choice. And I deserve to be able to choose the career that I want to have for myself. I've never been happy. I have the right to choose to be happy. And if that means breaking every rule that you have ever laid out for me and disappointing you entirely, so be it."
Good for
Yeah.
you. It's so hard to get to that point, and it is such a liberating feeling to stand up for yourself against that abusive authority that's over you. And I know that there's like that devastation of I'll never be enough in their eyes, that grieving of they'll never love me for me. And there's a bunch of mixed feelings with that. And there's that emptiness that comes with it. But there's also that liberation of, oh gosh, the chains, the invisible chains start to fall away. And you feel that sense of freedom. And with all those different kind of emotions going on, it's just, oh my gosh, I don't have to bear this burden anymore. Yeah.
Felt good, but I was terrified.
And what was his reaction to that?
He was the usual way, very pompous, and I'm sorry you feel that way, but we were only doing what we believed was right, and very much just holier than thou. And it was the same kind of attitude that he had with me when I told him that I was going to try attending a different church, which ended up becoming the church that I continued to attend for another year and a half before I lost my faith altogether. And I remember the night that I was telling him that I was going to go visit this place because I didn't want them to worry when I didn't show up at church the next day. I had enough respect for them to let them know that I was going to another place so that they wouldn't send the cops after me. I went in to talk to him and tell him what was going on. And he immediately was like, "No, you can't go to that place. They're this, they're that. They're not fundamentalist. They'll teach you whatever." And finally came down to the end of the conversation. And I said, "Look, I know that you don't approve of me going, and that's okay. I don't need your approval. I am only informing you of this so that you won't be concerned when I go and I don't show up at your church." His response to my telling him that I loved him was to look me dead in the eye and with complete seriousness on his face reply, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." It was at that moment that I realized that my father is convinced that he is God himself. And that was like the mic drop moment for me where I realized I need to get the hell out of here as quickly as I possibly can. Because if he thinks he's God and he has this form of power in his church, that's going to turn into something really bad. And it was bad anyway. So immediately I was terrified and I was like, okay, it's time to leave. And I did.
All right. Is there anything else you want to speak to that, or do you want to move on to the next subject?
We can move on to the next thing.
Yeah. And what was the impact of your mental health from Bob Jones University and really towards the end? What was that impact on you?
It took a nosedive. I wasn't in a good mental health position before I got there. And by the time I got out of there, I was so completely broken down from 2 years of constant abuse, sexual harassment, grooming, all of it that I was subjected to without any reprieve, that I basically felt like I didn't have any emotions anymore. I felt like a walking corpse, and I felt dead. And it took me several years to recover from that and get myself to a point where I felt like I was halfway human again.
Oh my gosh. And I was curious if you wanted to speak any more about any other grooming or sexual harassment you experienced at the school.
Yeah. I'm not really sure which year it was at this point because, like I said, my years start blurring together after one point. But I know when I was studying theater, I was in, I think it was a stage work class, but I was studying under Aaron Naylor at the time. And I got several clothing infractions during that period. And there was another period where another teacher who was very prominent in the drama department, who I won't name, but many people who have interacted with this person are probably going to know exactly who I'm talking about because he's notorious. But this other person came into the classroom on a couple of occasions. And I remember one occasion specifically, it was a hotter day than usual, and I had a brown dress suit that my mom had recently bought me that checked, but just barely. And it was the same situation with my body type being problematic. The skirt came down below my knees until I was sitting. And one of the things that we had to do in this particular class, unfortunately for me, was sit on the floor. And of course, my thighs being what they were, my skirt went pretty far up, and I had a great deal of difficulty keeping it down. And this other male teacher pointed out in front of the entire class and Aaron Naylor that he could see right up my skirt and that I needed to go change. So I was told to leave the classroom and go and change my clothes and to come back. But it was already at the end of the class period. So by the time I came back, class had been dismissed, and I was sent before the disciplinary panel a couple of days later, and I was given demerits for wearing an inappropriate dress because it had been reported on me. And that is one of several of the instances that I experienced, but that was the one that most notably shook me because it was coming from a male member of staff who was pretty pervy anyway. But it was in front of everyone. It was not done quietly like my other experiences had been. It was out and it was blatant and it was embarrassing. And it was also unfair.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And it's so typical in that sexist culture of how it's always put on the woman. Like, oh, why were you looking up her skirt? And that's the sad thing is always put on the woman. They're tempting. They're a stumbling block. They're the issue. And it's never put on the man at all, unfortunately. But yeah, that's just absolutely horrible. Just the humiliation of that in front of everyone. And when you came back to the class, what did the teacher say to you?
I don't believe it was brought up again, but the atmosphere in that particular class had always been really not very pleasant to begin with. That particular teacher is notorious for just being really cruel to her female students. She just has a thing against other women. And this particular teacher who had come in and pointed that out, it's been rumored that they are tight with one another and were at that time. I don't know whether they still are. I don't even know if they're still on campus or if they're still teaching. I don't care. But after that point, our already bad relationship as a student and a teacher deteriorated even further. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I was prematurely removed from the class because she didn't like me. I was placed in speech class after that, I believe. So I was moved from theatrical studies to speech.
hmm And something else I'm curious about is what was it like Could you set this scene of being put in front of the disciplinary committee?
Yeah, that was something that happened on multitudinous occasions. I was sent before them more times than I can even count, and it was always for really stupid reasons. It was traumatizing being put in front of them. And the more times I got put in front of them and the more ridiculous the things that I got sent up for. As time went on, I got less and less afraid and more just pissed off. One of the final straws was I got put before the disciplinary hearing one time because I had the stomach flu and I was stuck in the ladies' room at the beginning of chapel one day. And I was about 10 minutes late because I was literally sick in the bathroom. And they sent me up in front of the disciplinary committee and I got placed in front of this guy. And I was just so over all of it at this point. It was one of the second to last times I was sent up. And this this poor guy was made to be my inquisitor. I just stood there and I had my hand on my hip and I was like, "You want to know why I was late for chapel this day? I was on the toilet in the ladies' room fighting for my life. I had the stomach flu and I was a little bit busy. Would you like more details?" And he nudged the female next to him and was like, "Can you take this one?" To a female, and she had to deal with it. And of course, that particular time, I don't know if it was my attitude or what, but I told her everything, and I didn't get demerits for that one. But it was they didn't mess with me very often after that point because I just made it very clear to them, look, this is stupid. I have been sent before you guys for the dumbest reasons. I'm tired of this.
Yeah, good for you. What was that the last time you were sent in, or was there one more time?
I think there was one more time, and then after that, I don't know. I guess they felt like they had used up all of the things that they could possibly send me up for. And for disciplinary stuff at that point, they started sending me down to the dorm supervisor, and I was having private sessions with her, which were interesting to say the least.
Ooh, do you want to dig into that a little bit, or?
I don't really remember everything that was said during those times because they were very traumatic, but I do remember that it was more of the same things that people had accused me of that I wasn't guilty of, and people just trying to enforce control over me because I didn't fit in. And I didn't fit in with the mold. I wasn't your typical Bob Jones University student. Despite the fact that I wasn't a bad kid, I was doing the best that I could to follow the rules, but the rules were changing every 5 seconds, and it seemed that they only changed in regards to me. Everyone else seemed to have a much easier time, or at least the people who were around me in my immediate proximity. When I started being sent to the dorm supervisor and I was starting to have meetings with her like 3 or 4 times a week, and I could feel like the ceiling caving in on me, like I knew doom was coming. I was also very relieved by the knowledge of this because I knew that it meant that soon I would be able to escape and that I would finally be able to get out. But it was a very painful experience because I had to sit there and be under what felt like the Spanish Inquisition for all of these things that I hadn't done, and I was being accused of all and sundry. And my parents were on the phone with her and she would have long conversations in front of them that was like, yeah, so and so told me about this, so and so told me about that. It was a weird time. And I remember feeling like, why am I even here? My stay here as a student has been nothing more than just this long inquisitorial prison sentence. And I was constantly being accused of things and told that I was bad or told that I was X, Y, Z. One of the last sessions I remember was her telling me, after talking with my parents in front of me on the phone, that my grades were so bad and that my attitude, air quotes, was so bad, and that the school had enough of me and that I may as well just leave because I wasn't welcome anymore. And it took every ounce of strength within me not to reply. I know that you've made it blatantly clear since day one that you didn't want me here, and I didn't want to be here anyway, so screw you. I kept it to myself. I was a good girl, and I didn't say anything about it. And then after that point, it was pretty close to the end of the year, and so I just quit doing my homework altogether. And for the rest of the time that I was there, I attended classes because I had to. But then I would go back to my room and I would just play video games for the rest of the day. And that was how I stayed sane. We were allowed the Nancy Drew video games on campus, and that was what I played. And I played them sometimes for 10 to 12 hours a day. There was a couple of times during the last semester before I had to leave that I didn't have classes at all for a couple of days. And so those days I would just play video games. And that was how I coped until the end.
Mm. Oh my gosh. And just when you were talking about being in this room in this dormant or the trauma from that, because I know you had said there were parts you didn't remember, and that's disassociation. That's you're leaving your body to not experience that. And I'm so sorry. You were subjected to that abuse because that's what it is. It is abuse.
Yeah.
And it's so normalized in that culture, and you're supposed to accept it and take it because that person is an authority, and they try to tell you, oh, we're doing what's best for you, we're trying to make you a better person, whatever. There's always, in any cult, all of these abuses are always justified. They're always doing it for a good reason, for the spiritual mission, or oh, we're basing this in the Bible, or blah blah blah, just something to justify it. And it's really sad. And I think what I've enjoyed also about this conversation is you're also able to have that language of the reality of what you experience. Like when you talked about the sexual harassment for the demerits for your clothes, that's spot on. That's accurate. But I'm curious, so what was it like when you left Bob Jones University? Because I know when you left it, you were then in another high control environment with your family.
During that time, I was completely shut down for several years. So I don't really have any memory of what took place, except for the fact that we carried on with business as usual, in the sense that my mom would always tell me, if anybody asks you anything, don't give them any information. Just a lot of non-answers to direct questions and playing the no comment game, essentially. And that's how I've spent most of my life. It's always been, if you see somebody you know, play the no comment game. Don't tell them anything that's going on unless it's something that they're already aware of. Oh, I'm doing this project right now. Or, oh, I'm doing that project right now. And just staying quiet, essentially. But one thing that was definitely made clear to me again was that my parents were disappointed that I didn't graduate and get my MRS degree. And I was constantly reminded over the years after I had healed and gotten some sense of consciousness back that, oh, your life would have been so much better if you had have just graduated from Bob Jones and gotten your degree and found a decent guy, air quotes, decent guy. And we're disappointed that the trajectory of your life has ended you up in the situation that you're in now. You could have stuck at Bob Jones. You could have stayed around. You could have done XYZ, but no, you had to do what you did, which was just try to preserve myself, which didn't work very well. Sorry. What do you want me to do?
And the thing that is just so sad to me is that you talked about suspecting that, but really they were bugging your phone. They were talking to the university. It's just this orchestrated thing that they did to purposely break you down again, but they think that you don't know that. Do you have extreme anger and hatred for your parents? How do you deal with that? Because, ugh.
I went through a period where I definitely hated them. And it took me a long time to get to a point where it went from raw hatred to pity, which is what it is now. I've been subjected to a lot of really horrendous abuse at their hands for all of my existence. But I came to the realization one day that they literally do not know any better. And while their behavior is absolutely 100% harmful, and while I do not condone any of the things that they have done as parents, they have absolutely destroyed me as a human being, 100%. I am extremely mentally ill because of them. But I reached a point where I pity them because I know that they experience the same things. And if anything, they're probably equally as mentally ill, if not worse, than I am. And coming from a situation where I have a modicum of understanding of that existence, because I know that this is what they were told was the way to train a child, and they never had any other way taught to them. Yes, their behavior has been absolutely evil, but it's born out of ignorance. And I can accept that it's born out of ignorance without condoning the behavior. And that, in a way, has helped me skate through my
Mm,
situation.
yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's incredible you're able to hold those two things to be true in your mind when you've been indoctrinated in a very black and white worldview, in a black and white way to view things, either good or bad, light, dark, to see, but being able to see the nuance there, but still not condone it, but to understand that. I just want to recognize just the incredible amount of growth and maturity that takes to get to that point.
So it took a multitude of years, I will say, for that realization to sink in. I think age has something to do with it. You reach a certain age, enlightenment just hits you in the face one day about certain things, and you're like, oh, that's the way it is. But you go through life experiences and you learn about the people who are around you. And if you're any sort of an observationist like I am, which is typical for autistics, we watch people, we study them, we are curious about how they exist in everyday life, because a lot of the time it's different from how we have existed as neurodivergents. And you gather information about people that gives you an insight into their soul. It shows you what makes them tick. And I learned very early on what made my parents tick after I left college. And the realization of what made them tick, it made me sad, but it also made me realize that there was a reason for why they treated me the way that they did. And while their treatment of me was not good, and while it has been detrimental to me as a human being, it's all that they know. You can have that understanding and keep moving forward to the best of your ability. And in the end, that's all that you can do if you're going to the modicum of sanity in a situation where you're constantly being re-traumatized. You have no choice. And I think that's important for a survivor, because that is ultimately the point, to survive. And sometimes learning about people in the state of hypervigilance that we're frequently in is the only way to survive.
Hmm. Wow, powerful. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And something else I want to dig a bit more into is, you were at Bob Jones, you were told you had a learning disability, you were not given any accommodations. But I know later on you found out that you're autistic. So after finding that out, how did that change your perspective or your view of your time at Bob Jones University and how you were treated?
It was like somebody took a giant studio spotlight and shined it on the situation and illuminated all the dark places. All of a sudden, everything made sense. And that was in regards to my life as well, not just in Bob Jones, but outside of Bob Jones. It was like all of a sudden everything made sense. I had spent so much of my life feeling like an outsider, feeling like an alien, questioning constantly whether it could possibly be that rather than being a human, that perhaps maybe I was an extraterrestrial or a fairy, because I just didn't understand human beings and human behavior. And when I walked into the Bob Jones University culture, I remember feeling so confused, and I couldn't understand why I was so confused. I walked into the situation where all of these people acted this way and they talked this way and they dressed this way and they expected everybody to fall in line. And I just existed, and I got in trouble for existing. And I felt like I was a child again. When I was growing up as a child in the neighborhood that I grew up in, the kids in the neighborhood teased me, tortured me mercilessly for every single aspect of me as a human being. I was completely, vastly, totally different from everyone else in my neighborhood as a child. And my upbringing was not helpful in that situation. It made me stand out even further. So after years of having been an insular human being who retreated inside at the age of 13 and stopped going out altogether because the kids were too mean, I was subjected to the same relentless bullying again. And I felt absolutely helpless. I was very keenly aware of the fact that my existence was just wrong in that culture. And I was keenly made aware of the fact that nothing that I could do, no matter how hard I tried, was right. It was always going to be wrong. And that was enforced in my everyday life when I came home from my mom and dad. And it was just like I never had any sense of belonging until I became a survivor and connected with the survivor community and learned that neurodivergency was a thing and that it was a part of my identity. It was shocking when I discovered it. I was a little scared when I discovered it because autism and attention deficit disorder, any kind of depression or anxiety, any sort of mental health issues were always considered a sin problem. And getting help or accommodations for those sorts of things was frowned upon in all of the environments that I was a part of over my life. So while now I look back on it and I understand why, it still doesn't make the glaring fact that I just could not fit in regardless of how hard I tried any less painful.
Yeah, and it's just, I remember when you shared your story with me, just the part of it I related to so much was just that feeling of just not belonging, of being alien. And I remember posting something today in the discussion group just about, oh, why were certain people targeted? And the common thing in all the answers was difference. You're different in an environment that values sameness, that values conformity, and you become dangerous and even demonic in that kind of environment. And oh, it's just so sad, so heartbreaking. And I'm curious, after finding that out, who have you told and how have they treated you and reacted to you when you told them about autism?
I have been fortunate to retain some of the friendships that I had as a child growing up in the church that I grew up in. The sister of my friend who passed away before I went to Bob Jones is now my best friend. And her mother, also, who is still a part of my family's cult, but has proven herself to be a safe person. I have confided in them, and basically every other person in my friend group that I knew I was close to that I could trust. And one of my other friends that I did tell about this is also an autistic, and they were very loving about it.
I'm so glad that you've been able to find that chosen family and to connect in the survivor community. It makes you feel a lot less alone. And I'm glad you've been able to find that connection. But one of the questions I had, who are the villains in your story and what do they want to stop you from getting?
Sadly, my mom and dad, they've always been the villains of my story. Ironically, my mother is aware of that, but she uses it as oh, I'm a victim when we have blowouts where I have told her in the past, you're not helping me. But unfortunately, they've always been the main villains in my story. And the thing that they have made blatantly obvious is that they don't want me to have any independence. They don't want me to be able to achieve independence, not only as a woman, but also as a human being. They want me to remain where I am, living with them under their thumb and on the pedestal that they put me on. When they adopted me, primarily, I believe it was because I know that they wanted a child, but I think the reason that they wanted a child was not so that they could be parents, but so that they could fulfill the image of what a good IFB pastor and his wife were supposed to be. It was an unspoken belief, but it was very much shown as being a prominent belief system that if you were a pastor and his wife was infertile, that there was a sin problem. And that's how I came into the picture. They adopted me because my mother was infertile. And something that a friend of mine said when I told her about the autism thing, the conversation I had had with my dad, was that I was their trophy daughter and I was already tarnished in their eyes because I had left their cult. But now, bringing up the topic of neurodivergency, I was no longer just tarnished, I was dented, and therefore I was considered defective in their eyes.
Hmm. Oh, that's terrible.
That really blew everything out of the water for me. I was like, wow, you nailed it. That explains everything. That explains my upbringing, why I was always expected to be perfect, and why anytime I did the tiniest thing that wasn't even wrong, but was perceived as being wrong in IFB circles, I was punished so severely for them, and why I was broken so often and so early. And the realization that my parents think of me as a tarnished trophy with a dent in it that's on their pedestal that now has to be hidden away because no amount of polish can fix the damage that's been done. And the fact that their highest achievement for me has always been that I would be their caretaker when they were old and sickly and couldn't take care of themselves. Essentially, I'm the trophy, the slave, and the free healthcare. That's the highest that I can possibly be. And that's why they're hanging on to me, because they don't want to be embarrassed any further. And that's something that my mom keeps telling me. One of the things that she always has said throughout the period of my life was, don't do anything that would destroy your father's ministry. And one of the things that she said to me recently was, don't do anything else that could destroy your dad's ministry. I couldn't take anything else. And it was at that moment that I realized my entire existence has been to ensure that they look good. And they have placed all of the responsibility of the success of their ministry, air quotes, on me. They're constantly telling me everything I do reflects on them. They're constantly telling me that I can't do anything to tarnish, quote, my testimony. But in fact, they don't want me to do anything that would tarnish their image. And that was the mic drop moment for me, that I ceased to care anymore. While I have a great deal of love for them still, although I can't explain to you why, I know that I have to live for myself. I cannot continue to throw my life away for them as I have done for 3+ decades. It is time to forcibly saw the apron strings and sever them and break free somehow, some way.
Hmm. And I believe you will. I think like the growth that you've had is incredible, and you're ready soon, I think, to take that flight and be free and live the life that you do truly deserve. But something else I wanted to dig into is really like the steps. What steps have you taken? Which I know it's still so hard to heal when you're being re-traumatized in a situation, but what have you done to try to find some healing?
I got myself some insurance and now I'm in therapy.
That's
Um,
good.
it's been wonderful. I've had 2 sessions with my therapist, but she is amazing and I'm really excited each week for our next session. I got a multitude of diagnoses, which once upon a time I would have thought it was not possible for one to have so many mental illnesses on top of one another. But hi, I'm the poster child. And you're just learning how to cope in a healthy way rather than in a detrimental one. One of the things that my therapist said to me recently was that she was impressed by the fact that I have already been creating a safe and happy environment for myself. I've made my room in my parents' house my sanctuary. I've decorated it the way that I want to decorate it, which is something that I was never allowed to do when I was a child. My mom always picked the decor. And when I moved back in with them after being apart from them for 13 months, I was taking care of a family member's house for a year. I told my mom, I want free reign on the decor in my bedroom because I don't know how much longer I'm going to be living with you. And I'm used to having things decorated the way that I like them. So she said, okay. I now have photos of people that I find inspirational plastered all over my bedroom, much to my mother's chagrin. I barely have wall space now because I have so many photos up. And I've been bringing in little bits of furniture and implementing different things that make me happy and give me the opportunity to organize things and make the space friendlier to me so that I can have a clearer mind. And on top of that, I'm also practicing mindfulness in my everyday life. And I'm researching everything about my mental health and everything about the environment that I have come out of and the trauma that is associated with that, particularly the trauma that one gets after losing one's faith, as I have done. Which I will say, religious trauma syndrome, when you've lost your faith, hits you in the face like a ton of bricks all at once, immediately. And it's really hard to cope with. So, anybody else who's been through this, I completely sympathize with you. And I am so sorry because that is the definition of hell right there. All of the things that you feel all at once are so overpowering and overwhelming and scary. And learning how to just figure out your direction in everyday life with all of those things going on at once is really overwhelming. But yeah, I'm going through each and every day and I am listening to my body, focusing on my mind, and doing the best that I can to keep myself in a place where I'm progressing in a healthy pathway so that I can leave the traumatic behind me and move forward into healing. And I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I just know that my therapist thinks I'm doing something good. and I feel better than I have done. And one of the first steps that I knew that I needed to take was telling my story, which scared the hell out of me. But I knew that if I continued to harbor all of that trauma within myself and I didn't release it, that scar would never heal. And scar tissue is gigantic on this issue. I know I've said this before, but I'm grateful for you and for what you are doing with this. And I hope that we can blow BJU out of the water finally, with all of our combined voices speaking the truth of all of the pain and trauma and atrocity that has been committed at the hands of all of the people that are affiliated with that university. I hope that this is the catalyst that's necessary, and I'm grateful for you.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. It's been an honor to be able to let other survivors have that space and to bring them together to share their stories. And yeah, it's been really a lot has changed for me too with connecting with other BJU survivors because I remember going past Bob Jones, and in the past it would just be, oh, I would think about my experiences, but now when I'm in contact with it, I think of so many other people's, and knowing that I'm not alone is so validating and so connecting. And it's also empowering to be able to share your story because Bob Jones and all these fundamentalists, they would rather us be quiet. They would rather silence us. They would rather have people not listen. And it's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming.
About 100 years, I would say. It has been a long time coming for sure. But yeah, the last, I want to say 30 years or so of all of the people that have been traumatized at the university and are now coming out. If enough people scream from the rooftops loud enough, we may see the day where BJ realizes there's hell to pay. And I hope we get a front row seat.
Yes, I've enjoyed hearing your story through all of this, and there's one last question that I had, and the last question, is there anything you would like to say to other survivors who may have gone through a similar experience or are in a similar situation?
Don't be afraid to speak out. I know how terrifying it is when you are in a high control environment and everyone is making a concerted effort to silence you and brainwash you and gaslight you and tell you that you're a liar, that you're worthless, and that what happened to you doesn't matter in a larger scope of face belief systems. Don't believe them. Anything that has happened to you, anyone who has hurt you, anyone who has subjected you to abuses, I don't care what they are. I don't care if you think they're small or insignificant. They aren't. Come forward. Don't be afraid to tell your story, because this university has to be held accountable for all of these atrocious things that it has done to all of the students who were there and who have been victimized by them. The time is now. Please don't stay silent. You can tell your story and you can have a community. We will be standing behind you. Please don't feel like you're alone. You're not.
Wow, that's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming forward because I remember when you first reached out to me, and I was just, it's always so exciting to me to see people share their story for the first time. And because I think I remember, when I did that, I think, wow, 2 years ago, like how empowering it is. It's just, it changed my life so much. And that's why I love doing this work. Was there was someone 2 years ago who gave me that platform, and really it was like for the first time in my life I was seen, heard, and understood. For the first 22 years of my life I was not at all, but then when that person gave me the opportunity, it was just, Yeah, it was life-changing so much. Thank you so much for coming forward, sharing your traumas, but also sharing some of your healing journey. And I do hope that you'll live the life that you truly deserve. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond BJU. If you are listening on Apple Podcast or on Spotify, if you could leave a 5-star rating, this will help other listeners just like you discover the show. Thank you.